right, folks, let's get started. Super excited to introduce David to everyone here. David is a core contributor to Selenium. He's also the chairperson for the W3C Browser Testing and Working Tools Working Group, and he's an editor of the W3C WebDriver specification, and he's the open source engineering manager at BrowserStack. So he wears many hats. He's also authored multiple books, including a couple of books on Selenium and Selenium 1.0 testing tools and Selenium 2 testing tools, a beginner's guide. So yeah, I'm really excited to have David talk about what next and sort of beyond WebDriver. Over to you, David.
So thank you for that, Praveen. Thank you for everyone who's kind of been sat diligently listening to all the talks today. They've all been really good. And so hopefully I can kind of keep up to that caliber that we've seen already. So as Praveen said, I'm David. I kind of head up the open source work here at BrowserStack. I work on the Selenium project. I kind of work on standards. I've spent many years at Mozilla working on browsers, and so I kind of know all the ins and outs of WebDriver. And I have kind of opinions of where we need to be going and how to get there. And so today is my talk is going to be around kind of where I think WebDriver should go and how it's going to get there. And we kind of have seen some movement already in that way. So I'm going to go through I'm going to talk about the history. I'm going to talk about kind of the future, and then we'll get to some questions and answers. I will try my best to answer everything. Like one thing I want to kind of make notes is that like a lot of this is still in development, still kind of in design, and so we know roughly where we want to go, but how we get there is still kind of changing. So we need to understand the past to truly understand where we need to go, right? And so kind of the reason for this is that like we need to kind of go back to the future. We need to kind of understand where we've been. And when I started on the WebDriver and kind of started helping out with the project, a lot of work was done to develop drivers that you needed to drive the browser, and this was always done as the best best language, best tooling that you can to speak to the browser. So like if you wanted to speak to Internet Explorer, because that was such an important browser back in the day, you needed to write some COM code. So kind of if you've ever used Python and COM code, or Java and COM, or kind of any language and COM, you've normally had a really bad time and kind of hit weird bugs or kind of crashed your browser, crashed your operating system, because you're kind of bridging these things, and it's really hard to do. And one of the problems that when we were doing all this work with Selenium was that anytime someone wanted to add a new language to the Selenium project, the first thing you needed to do was check, could it do any of the COM work, or could it, for Firefox, it was simple, it was just HTTP, and Chrome didn't really exist back then. It was just mostly those two, and then Opera came along and started work things, and Opera had their own mechanism for doing things. So adding new languages was really hard. Adding new browsers was really hard. Upgrading browsers was really hard. And so kind of we had to get to a point where that wasn't good enough. And the Selenium project has always been kind of a handful of people constantly just keeping it going at its core. The size of the project has not really grown in terms of contributors. It's maybe doubled, but it's still less than double-digit people, and who are kind of constantly contributing to it. And so we worked towards getting to a point where actually we needed something that we could kind of all speak to, that was in every language, that we could easily just integrate, simplify a lot of our code and start getting that way. And so we went from kind of having to speak native ways for each browser and driving the browser that way to a way of kind of these driver executables. And we then moved on to the JSON wire protocol. Why? Well, pretty much because every single language has brilliant HTTP support. And if it doesn't, kind of normally those languages aren't really worth using for kind of driving the web. So like, you're not really going to be driving WebDriver with COBOL, but I'm sure if someone wanted to write support for it, like, it should be fairly simple compared to its previous days of having COBOL to kind of learn the Opera Dragonfly DevTools or COM, or kind of the way we did Firefox. And so we kind of landed on this HTTP protocol, and it allowed us to kind of grow very quickly. And so that whenever changes happened, there was always this one constant that meant we didn't need to do upgrades too quickly, and kind of we could handle it. And we also got to the point where browsers started releasing every 6 weeks. And so when you've got about 6 people supporting the Selenium project every 6 weeks for a new browser, and at that time it was Chrome and Firefox, kind of they weren't too far apart when they started doing that. It became a lot of work for us, and that's where the standard eventually came out of, is that we tried to push a lot of this work onto each of the browser vendors, because browser vendors understand their browser a lot better than kind of the group of people that were working on it, on Selenium. And so we get to this point where we understand what's the good and the bad of WebDriver. So the good is we can build new clients. So like when Node came along, adding on a Node client like WebDriver IO, like Kevin showed, like adding that in was really easy. It was incredibly easy to build distributed grids of infrastructure. We see this with like BrowserStack. There's the Selenium grid from the project that allows people to do it. And suddenly we could get really good browser support, because with WebDriver being a standard, standards have to have tests that can be shared between everyone. These are looked after by the W3C. Well, actually, they're looked after by every browser vendor, but they're in a central repository maintained by the W3C. Called Web Platform Tests. And so you can go in there, look at the WebDriver tests, and if you wanted to build your own browser or make tweaks or things like that, there are tests to kind of prove what you're doing and how you're doing it and why it's working. The bad of WebDriver, and I kind of use this very loosely, is that WebDriver has always been kind of synchronous in its design. You want to do something, you do a synchronous call. Kevin showed it in his talk earlier of like, hey, you want to kind of, why have all these awaits? Why have all this? People like, while languages might have asynchronicity built into it, or kind of by its default, if you look at JavaScript, whenever people think of their tests, they think synchronously. They go, I want to do this step, this step, this step, this step, this step, and then finish it off. And WebDriver does not offer access to the internals of the browser. And by internals, I mean kind of, you can't manipulate the network stack. You can't ask for kind of things that are hidden to the to average users. So like if there are JavaScript errors and you wanted to know about them, but you needed kind of to have debug access to kind of the JavaScript engine, you're not given it. And that's mostly by design, because like one of the things that has come up regularly through my WebDriver career is like people will be forced into automation who are not always trained to be programmers or trained to kind of do the automation. QA departments are notoriously underfunded, and so they will have their own problems around kind of how to get QA to do things. And then there's the other side of things, is like, do you really need to do it, or do you actually understand the question that you're asking? So kind of like, people have always asked, oh, can I have WebDriver give me HTTP statuses? If you load one web page, you could be getting up to like 100, 200 HTTP statuses on different artifacts and assets that are being downloaded to the page. So when you ask for the status, which status are you actually asking for? And it's not just a simple case of I'd want the web page's status, because like with React and things like that, the web page is so lightweight nowadays, and then it starts downloading and gets other statuses. So we can't kind of just, it's understanding the question better as people go in and kind of making sure that they understand how to do things and do things better. And so kind of with all of this in the future, like all our past, we've also got to now think of the future. We see projects like Puppeteer, Cypress, Playwright, all developing their own way of doing things. And the Selenium project has always been about collaboration and how can we improve things. So kind of, while some of the names that I've mentioned might talk down on Selenium, like a lot of the times we would love to collaborate with them to see how we can improve things. And so we've been learning, we've been using some of the knowledge that we had from browser vendors, having seen how WebDriver has grown. And we are now looking at how we can improve the future. Maya talked about it briefly earlier, but the future is what is called WebDriver Baidai. So WebDriver Baidai stands for bi-directional communication. So with Selenium and WebDriver, currently if you ask for something, it will fire off a HTTP request to like a server. So that could be your Java server, your Gecko driver, Chrome driver, BrowserStack, and then kind of heads out. It waits for a response to come back, and then you can carry on. And where WebDriver Baidai will allow you to open up a connection and keep that connection up the entire time, so that you can get other bits of information. When we've been thinking about it and designing it, like it is being designed for automation first. So an example of what I mean by this is that like CDP has some really good features, but CDP is a debug protocol. It allows you to get into the internals of the browser and kind of be able to debug it. It's only by chance that Puppeteer is able to do the things that it does, and it does it by kind of manipulating multiple levels of CDP to get it to do what it wants. CDP is also very much designed to work with Chrome. So kind of where Maya was showing the work that they've done, Firefox is never going to be able to get all the same features that Chrome has, mostly because in CDP and things like that, it's designed to kind of, a lot of those browser features are bled through into the protocol, and you can't have something that's interoperable work that way. So kind of, we've been designing it for automation, we've been designing it for interoperability. And the key thing is that like, it's also being designed to allow you to migrate from the original WebDriver or WebDriver HTTP or whatever you want to call it, but like your WebDriver tests of today, being able to migrate them across to the new WebDriver Baidai and be able to use some of those new features, that is being designed kind of from the start. as I mentioned earlier, like the QA departments or kind of developers and things don't necessarily have time, nor are they allowed to kind of just go in and rewrite tests or upgrade tests. Not everyone has the management that would allow them to go, hey, there's this new shiny thing, go migrate over to it. And so kind of maintenance and migration has been designed from the start. And the important thing is that we're learning from other frameworks. What in the newer frameworks do people like? There is a perceived speed improvement with kind of Puppeteer. It's not necessarily true, but it's kind of it's that perception of kind of you've got direct access, but kind of you might be doing multiple calls at that time, even though you have direct access. So kind of it's this perception that people like. And so how can we learn from that? How can we improve it? And so kind of the APIs that are being designed are around how can we automatically wait for certain things, set up observers so that you know that an element that you're looking for is actually there. WebDriver already does some of that work for you. Especially kind of if you might like clicking and you go to a new page, it already kind of handles all that stuff. So it's all about kind of learning those new features and kind of growing them in a meaningful way that people can use them without being bogged down with too much extra features that say something like CDP comes along with. So kind of, I'm going to go through some use cases, and these are the kind of the use cases that people are like I've been talking to people about. I'm sure there are use cases that everyone here can think of, and like I would love to hear what some of your use cases are that you can think of, and what are the features that you would love to be able to do with kind of as WebDriver progresses. But like features like the ability to have a test fail whenever JavaScript error happens. This is kind of something that people have always been wanting. They kind of want a logging mechanism that they can kind of do it. With WebDriver, the reason why it never went into Firefox is that it would have to be this weird circular buffer, and you might miss things. And so kind of being able to kind of have log information come down to the to your test machine from your server is important, or from the browser. The ability to kind of set observers, like has this DOM element arrived, or has this DOM element disappeared, or kind of mutated in some different form. But it's this kind of growth in like how can you add new features like that and be able to kind of set event-driven development. And as kind of new languages grow asynchronous libraries as first-class citizens, we can do this for kind of, you're not like in the Puppeteer world limited to JavaScript. You can start doing this in Java, Python, Ruby, and so on. And so kind of building that out. And there are other kind of lots of other use cases that we can go down. But it's kind of learning from kind of using the 15 years that WebDriver has been around, using that knowledge and kind of improving it so that we can do things. And being able to have the likes of Apple join us to the table and kind of work and like have your tests work on mobile or on desktop, on Apple devices, within Firefox, on multiple platforms, within Chrome, on multiple platforms. And we can get to a point like Maya in the first talk of the day mentioned, is that like Puppeteer and some of these other tools can just become opinionated versions of Selenium. And we can kind of just have these client libraries that all kind of work under the hood, simplifying and increasing the ability to test as we move forward. Unfortunately, kind of adding all these features has its own problems. And so I'm sure we've all kind of, or maybe it's just me, inadvertently kind of took down machines at work or servers at work because we've suddenly been sending too much data. With WebDriver, you can kind of scale up. You can run like, I think I've done presentations with BrowserStack earlier this year where on my laptop, I was running 200 concurrent sessions against BrowserStack and spun up to 200 browsers. If you get to an event-driven world and you say you want your test to fail whenever there's a log file or a JavaScript error and the logging kicks in and it sends it back to your server, there is the problem that you could essentially DDoS your test running machines, or and so kind of we're trying to think about how people can think about those problems, or kind of these areas where you have lots of data suddenly coming back where before you might not have had, and how can we migrate people into those worlds without kind of making them rewrite everything or making them lose the ability to go super fast. Because, like, you know, WebDriver is designed to kind of work independently and is thread safe, so you can kind of have a file with like 10, 20 tests, and like you can have test runners that will run each of those tests inside that file independently quite quickly, and we want to be able to keep that speed, keep that versatility, while also adding these new features that allow you to kind of dig into the browser slightly more so that you can get more and more features coming out of it. But as I say, some problems create new opportunities, and a lot of these opportunities I'm pretty sure I can't think of, and I don't want to. So kind of like it's being able to kind of learn and grow with other tools and see how they improve things, seeing how kind of things work on large distributed networks like BrowserStack or kind of other large Selenium grids, being able to grow these features and kind of without kind of destroying the kind of the branding, the naming of people's tests, because it's important that kind of we make sure that the web is interoperable. We don't want kind of everything to just work on an Android phone or just work against Chrome. We want it to work against every browser and allow people to choose what they want. And so kind of this is, I think, where we want to go with this is definitely the right direction, and some of it is still being designed, and so we're getting there. So the next steps, at the moment, it is being put into a standards body, well, into my kind of working group within the W3C. It's been driven a lot by Google and by Mozilla at the moment, and by Microsoft. They're the kind of there's three people, each from one of the companies, driving a lot of this work so that we can get it out. We see great benefits, and kind of being able to grow this will allow you to do really cool features, and kind of those cases where, you know, you want to test on mobile and you want to do kind of complex user actions on a mobile device that WebDriver allows, but you can't do on Puppeteer, but you want to get Puppeteer logging. We can try kind of get to a world where Puppeteer and WebDriver could potentially merge as projects, or kind of at least at a protocol level that they can kind of grow into each other and benefit everyone, so that everyone tests on kind of all browsers, and we keep the web free and open for everyone to use. And that's it, really. I hope some people have questions. And yeah.
Great, thanks, David. Couple of questions around Baidai. I think how do I access it, or is it available for me to use right now? And
So
that was one on whether that's like, can I use that right now? I think Maya had covered that a little bit during her talk.
so at the moment, it's not available because it's still being designed. One of the key features that are part of this is that we want to simplify kind of the route to upgrading for kind of say Puppeteer and WebDriver users. And so it's probably still going to be WebSocket based like CDP, and it's going to be JSON RPC-ish. I'm saying ish because kind of we know roughly what it's going to be, and it's not exactly that, but it's close enough. And so it's being developed, and kind of the simplicity that we're aiming for would allow kind of slowly migrating to it. One of the problems that like, and this I know this from having worked on a browser for the last 9 years, is adding a new protocol to a browser is a little bit tricky because every time you add a protocol, it's a new attack vector that people can try use. So kind of we need to be adding these new features while making sure that it's still secure and it's still usable for people. So it's kind of, it might take a little bit longer, but in the end, I think it'll be worthwhile. And because we've got Chrome and Mozilla and Microsoft helping, hopefully it'll be in browsers soon, but whatever variation of soon is.
Okay, great. And I think there were a couple of questions in the chat around. In terms of things like stability, maybe building a more robust test suite, what are some of the capabilities or advantages that Baidai, improvements that Baidai will offer?
So like one of the bad things with the command response setup in WebDriver is that you have to do this polling. So is this element here or not here? Or has it changed? Like, is it like, and you're constantly asking. And so things could happen, like an element could say, be removed and then re-added, like if you're using a front-end tool like say React or Ember or whatever, it could add something and then like, oh, actually that I can find that element. So it's not disappeared, but it could have disappeared and then come back because of something. And so with the Baidai stuff is that you could go notify me when this element on a page mutates. So does it disappear or is it removed, or kind of is it removed and then added, or kind of if it changes in somehow, like if you want it like you could go down quite granular, but has this element mutated, let me know and then I'll carry on. And so you can stabilize tests that way. But you know, like Puppeteer does have its own kind of issues with kind of stability and weights, because like waiting for a browser to do something is incredibly hard. And so like we've seen with Puppeteer and Cypress and Playwright and Selenium, like they all have their wait libraries to kind of wait for you. And because like it's hard, it's a hard problem to solve, but people are getting there, but it's kind of these like little things that people want. It's like, I want you to notify me when I can carry on rather than me waiting.
Got it. What about maybe some thoughts around, I think you talked about this just now, is Cypress versus Baidai, and how do you see that playing out? And
so like truthfully, my opinion is that I would love like I'm all for opinionated libraries. If people want to like the way Cypress or WebDriver IO or Selenium or Puppeteer, if they prefer those APIs, they should do it. The thing that I think is important is that like reinventing the wheel is only useful to a certain point. and then kind of like it's the other bits that add on that where the true value comes into it. And so like Cypress might have other things that are of value, and they don't have to worry about like, how is the browser this week reacting to this command? Allow them to kind of build out their tooling that way. And same with WebDriver, and same with kind of Puppeteer, is that like, try, like if we had people solving the slightly harder problems and kind of like, hey, I've got this really cool feature that I think should be in a browser for automation. There's a mechanism that they can suddenly go, hey, it'll work in Chrome and Firefox and Apple and in Safari. Like you can get these things quite quickly. And I think getting to a stage like that is better for kind of everyone in general, really.
Got it. Got it. All right. I think that is all we have in terms of questions.
There is one question I did see in the Q&A. Someone was asking, is that a Firefox developer edition? Right. It's not a throw cushion, it's a beanbag. And it's so kind of, because I spent 9 years at Mozilla. I have a lot of Mozilla swag, and that was one of them. When they shut down a London office for a new London office, I was able to grab that because they didn't want to move it between offices.
Nice. I think somebody detected your South African accent also.
Cool.
All right. Awesome. I think that's a wrap for day 3. Thanks a lot, David. I think, all of us are really excited about Baidai and some of the capabilities that it offers. So we're all waiting with bated breath for the release. Thank you all for attending, attending a pretty packed set of sessions today in day 3 with 5 separate sessions. We hope that you've learned a little bit about some of the different frameworks, and also learned a lot about decentralizing and having a sort of distributed platform for testing, like Twitter has implemented, with Omoise and Nupur. So thank you to all the speakers for day 3, and I am really excited about day 4.